Welcome and thanks for coming and thanks for showing interest in this. I'll try and orientate it as much as I can for something that might be useful in the domain of your teaching. This is something I think I do a lot of presentation and teaching for professional performers and uni students, but I think it's very, very easily translates into age appropriate and level appropriate and ensemble appropriate ways of using this, what we're going to be doing today. So I just want to start off by demonstrating a little bit, because classical music improvisation means, well, improvisation full stop means a lot of different things to different people. And if you look around the world, if you ask a jazz musician what's improvisation, they might say, well, sort of playing around with the jazz standards, putting a little bit of your own notes in there, making it come to life in a way that's natural for you. It could be playing a solo. If you ask an informed classical musician, they'll probably say, well, in historical performance practice, you know, embellishing Baroque and early music. If you ask a student who's a bit bored, they might be doodling or noodling in their practice room instead of practicing. If you ask a Japanese traditional shakuhachi flute player what improvisation is, they'll say it's the most mindful thing that a human being can achieve. So there's a lot of different perspectives on it. Mine is that it's an opportunity for classical musicians, no matter what age and what level of attainment, to make their own music. Hopefully as much for the concert stage as much as in their living room. What I see the value in that is that we're able to then bring our own music to the world. There's enough string quartets and soloists playing all the classics and a lot of new works, which are great, and they'll eventually get into the system too. But I think there's great value in what each musician has to offer. Now, in terms of translating that into classroom, I think the big thing is that it's about giving people an avenue into music education. I know probably most of you have already done quite a bit of improv with your classes, so I want to be clear, I don't think I'm preaching anything new here, but perhaps it's interesting to explore approaches. And one of the things I want to do is to look at how improvisation can be used as a way to really develop a very reflective and very vulnerable statement about ourselves or about through our music, in a way that ironically a lot of the music culture, in fact our actual culture, stands in the way of. To give you an example, if I go to a school or a university or a professional gathering of professional string players, it can be even more intense. The level of fear and stage fright is so immense, it's very unlikely that I'm going to get anything really personal from them. And so that's something that for me it's part of the terrain. And what it's really about is trust. We've built an education system around classical music especially, where there's a real erosion of trust, and with each other, if you've been through uni doing a full-time music course. That's a bit of a background to what I'm going to be addressing. But the main thing is this wonderful opportunity for everyone to make their own mark. I mean, if you go to an art gallery, if someone has a show on at the gallery here at WAAPA, one of the graduates, you're not going to go and see a whole of Rembrandts faithfully reproduced. Very unlikely, unless they put a twist on it or it was a special statement. So you're going to hear the artist's original work. If you go to a writer's festival and a writer presents a draft for a new book, they're not going to be copying a famous writer from the 19th or 18th century. They're going to bring in their own ideas of their own time and their own insights and their own inspirations. So we are quite isolated in that sense that generally we just are reproductionists in a wonderful way. So I think this is a really important question for all of us in music education, because for people who aren't going to be musicians, it's an education, music, as you're all aware, is a really rich and important part of people's education as a person. What we're doing, opening the door to this idea that everyone has something to offer, including them themselves, that's going to make them into a much more adventurous concert-going audience as well. And this is the reason why Music of Eva and Co have music in the schools. It's purely so that there's going to be an audience in 15 years' time. And I think the more diverse we can make that sort of educational platform, the more interesting and rich it's going to be, but also the more, I think, future-proof. So, and look at festivals, it's getting more and more competitive. There's only so many composers, but there's millions of musicians. And if every quartet and every piano trio and every soloist and every duo and every octet brought their own music, imagine that, it would just be this fabulous. There'd be millions of new works for every instrument. And the other advantage is that any ensemble, if you've got an odd ensemble at school or with your fellow musicians, you've got a trombone, double bass, a soprano and a marimba, you're set. You've got the repertoire for that because you can adapt. The improvisation lets you adapt to any ensemble at all. So that's just a starting point. But I'd like to just play you a few things to give you an idea of what it can be like and perhaps what it isn't. So I'm going to start off just with a few short pieces and then I'll break them down and show you what I did to create that. So I'm improvising. To me, that doesn't really cut it. What I'm trying to do is capture a particular emotion. So to do that, I have to have something in mind. I like to have some kind of scene in mind, some sort of place or situation, or even a particular feeling can be enough. But then it's a matter of, okay, well, how do we create that? So in the second piece, it was something of a contemplative nature that I wanted to get across. And something of some kind of feeling of hope. And what I used was one of the 7 modes. I used a Lydian mode, which has got the major scale of the raised 4th. And that just has this lovely this sort of sound to it, which I think has this lovely lift. So being able to start to give some direction to our improvisation, I think is really, really interesting and very important. And I appreciate in a classroom situation, just to scale this back a little bit, is that you've mostly got crowd control for a start going on. Concentration spans very different age groups. What access to instruments that you've got in the room is very different as well. And so in order to translate into these sorts of situations, I think it's just about having some kind of picture in mind, some kind of story, some kind of scene. And the kids will often come up with their own, they're never short of ideas. And one of the things about that is that then it has meaning for them. It's something that they're interested in. And then we move into the terrain of, well, how do we express those ideas? And what sort of tools from our musical toolbox are going to make sense? One of the ways I like to approach it is simply, okay, of all the scales and modes we could use, or if you've got fixed tuned percussion, depending on which notes you start on and how big the actual range is, of course, you may be stuck with a kind of major tonality, but usually if there's enough notes there to start on a different note to get a minor, then that at least gives you the choice of major or minor. So at least we're in the door with the tonality. Is it going to be major? Is it going to be minor? If it's a more reflective sort of story or a bit mysterious, sometimes a minor is really great. So even if we do something pentatonic, we've got a minor pentatonic we could choose as opposed to a major. So it's very different from we're starting to move into the area of musical language and musical gestures, and again, it's not an intellectual thing. I think it's best kept to practical examples, so that what we're doing is going, okay, what's a way we can create that mood or that atmosphere of the story that we want to tell? It could be something really simple, just using 3 notes from a minor pentatonic. Or if it's a more percussive instrument. And then you start to work into the area of what we normally only get at the end of our music education, at least in the elementary area, is a sort of phrasing and touch. So that conveys something, but we're just waiting a bit. And that's where we start to move into making it sound more mysterious or more like, marching off to some sort of imaginary medieval battle or whatever the people are into, the students are into in the session. So this is where we start to go, okay, so tonality is important. There's a whole major, depending on the sophistication of the students and the instrumentation. There's major and minor, and within that, there's obviously, in the traditional training, you've got a major scale and you've got the harmonic minor and the melodic minor. Well, there's a lot of modes which are great, and they're much simpler than that. And that brings us all the 1, 4, and 5 are the major in the modes, and then the 2, 3, 6 are the minors. We've got a choice. We've got a choice then of a whole of material depending on the sophistication. If you can, if you've got the luxury of a more advanced group of students, like it might be a string ensemble, maybe in secondary school, I think that the educating people in the tonal possibilities, the expressive possibilities of the modes, is really, really heightened by not using white notes, starting on a different degree of the scale to get your modes. And we're just playing around with an imaginary tone set in the tonic, and actually emotionally it doesn't affect us differently. If I get you habituated to a D major scale, and I start on this degree, you're not really hearing much difference. But if I went like this, here's the D major, and then I went, that's really emotionally very different territory. And I think that's something that it's not always possible because of the limited physical instruments or the actual skill space. If you've got a chance, if you started on something like a Dorian mode, and then from there, at least that'll sound like the home base. So that's just a danger that I think is inherent a little bit in white note mode teaching and usage. But again, we're often limited to that for a number of reasons. There's some really great pentatonics that are outside the normal major and minor ones. You know, outside of that, you get these wonderful things, wonderful pentatonics. Or more from the Asian spectrum of tune. So in terms of exploring pentatonics, again, depends on your students and depends on your instrumentation. But I think there's some really rich stuff in that. So tonality is one part of the way I approach improvisation, whether it's for uni or school. The other side of it is with the rhythmic component, or what I call the metric or the meter of the music, how it moves. And I was recently watching a video of an interesting guy I met in Switzerland at a conference. He's an Italian violinist, and he gets a lot of these musicians doing all sorts of things, everything from jousting on horseback to all sorts of extraordinary activities, dance, theatre. And what he's trying to do is get people into the picture of that time, because when you see them riding the horses, and he also has the ensemble playing music while they walk the horses around, ride the horses around, and you start to realise the pace and the way the beat moves, it's not metronomic, and most good music is not metronomic. That actually comes from things like the movement of the horse's leg, the four legs in sequence, gives you this lovely opportunity to play. So they're doing things like moderate tempo movements from Vivaldi and many of the other Baroque composers, based on, and they're having to play to suit the horse's movement, which is actually quite regular. Horses normally walk in a very regular way. And the change in the atmosphere of the music was really quite marked. It was really quite noticeable. So the way the music moves is quite a profound factor, as much as major or minor tonality. And in our culture, we don't pay much attention to it, except whether it's duple or triple time. But in cultures like Indian traditional classical music, you learn 34 scales, and you learn about the same number of different rhythm patterns. They're just like you have to know them, bang, do this, bang, do that. And what that does, it opens up a very rich rhythmic vocabulary and awareness. So how the music moves, obviously it is generally duple or triple time. So an awareness of that with the students is really interesting to explore, because then we start to look at things like what does that feel like compared to when I go more of a 6/8. And kids feel this stuff, they're very sensitive. What I'm trying to do is create a palette of choices which gets people out of the I don't know what to do category. Because that's how I started, was doing recording sessions for the advertising industry as a part-time thing. And they'd say, okay, the string quartet's played, we've done a 1 hour session. Oh, can the cellist just stay, just make up a line over what we recorded? And of course, any of us who were asked to do that completely freaked out because we hadn't been prepared for it, which I think is an interesting marker for professional music education, you know, for people going into the field as players, as much as anything. But knowing what to do, that feeling of not knowing what to do, the temperature of that is brought right down when we check in fact, with all the things a composer does. So in that sense, I'm quite compositional in the way I approach improvisation and teach it. So we're looking at things like tonality. What from the tonal palette, is it free tonality, any note goes? Is it major, is it minor? Oh, well, what are the choices from major and minor? What's our instrumentation? What are the capabilities? At least it gets us into some kind of ballpark there. Then we've got the meter of it, whether it's duple or triple time in some way, or compound, although that's unusual with the younger ones. Is it fast or slow? Does it accelerate and decelerate? All of these sort of things, they're all emotional tools. Everything that we're talking about is an emotional tool for the audience and hopefully for the player. Then we're looking too with how we phrase things, you see, in rhythm is where our phrasing comes from. People think of phrasing as the notes, it is. But actually, if you break it down scientifically, it's how long we stay on a note, or how soon we rush towards the next one, or how long we wait before we get to the next one. It's all in the sphere of the metrical part. So it's a really interesting thing for kids to explore, I find, to be able to not just bang away, oh, we're improvising, but are we improvising like this? Do we wait? Do we rush? All of those sorts. They're very elemental. They can be taught at such an elemental level of music instruction. Is in violin technique, one of the last things we learn is string crossing. Much later than we learn but all they have to do is we have to just pull our arm down and bring it back up again. So how expressive could that be if we really applied ourselves? There's drama right there. Or. So what I like about this is that there's so many ways that we can already bring in quite developed levels of musical expression to very, very simple abilities. And why I think that's important is, especially if you teach middle school, is that the rate of emotional development is starting to really accelerate. And if someone comes to me to learn violin at the age of 13 or 12 as a special, or 11 even, as a startup program, this it doesn't really cut it for someone who's pre-teen or teen. And being able to improvise and create the same skill set these sort of things, this is why I think improvisation has so much to offer, because we can express so much drama, which then starts to hit into the emotional range of especially those middle school, early teen students. And even if they're students who haven't done a lot and they get to that age, even if they've been playing for 2 or 3 years and they haven't really gone to great heights, one of the reasons they give up often, does anyone have a high attrition rate with instrumental students in the early secondary? Right? Because in their schools, because that's what's going on. The emotional development's outstripping what we can offer them. So it really comes back to us. And I think by approaching music like this, where it becomes more like making pictures, tell a teenager to paint a picture. They can go crazy, they can do whatever they like. But if they have to paint a picture in a certain way and reproduce this particular thing, if it's not at their kind of emotional age level, they're going to get really, really bored. And I don't blame them, because we're not meeting them. So I think it's a lovely way where they can do all the things they have to do developmentally to have a sensible pathway, but we can supplement it with so much really interesting material just by being innovative and in how we use improvisation as something, as an expressive device. It's I think the whole value to me in all of this is the expressive element. So the next part it's a little bit more advanced, but we can kind of carry them into it. It's the stylistic consideration. So we might have a minor pentatonic again. If I play something like that, Mr. Guenther, Kung Fu Panda, because it uses a pentatonic scale in a Chinese style, or alludes to a Chinese style. So the kids have already got this education. They've already got a world music education. So there's so much stuff we can draw on, just because of the movies. It's all because of the movies. Hollywood has done that for us. It's a great job. and they've all seen stories in films that have a bit of a Middle Eastern character, and there's invariably, you know, there's all this sort of thing happening. So they're very well educated in that sense, audibly. So what we're trying to do is give them simple things that they can play out those emotional fantasies or those emotional needs, and find something that actually matches it. But there's a lot in that. Compared to, you can see why teenagers would start to get interested in the former more than that. And again, I think it's understandable. So there's a lot we can do. Anyway, stylistically, we can take any scale format. Could be Asian. We can take the same thing. Suddenly we've got blues. We're just bending a little on the third, which most kids can play out of tune pretty easily anyway if it's a string instrument. It's a little bit more restricted sometimes with tune percussion, but that's where you get into using rhythmic embellishment. A bit hard to do on this, but obviously you've got the whole art of repetition. So you've got three notes. Whatever they're capable of, even with two. There's a nice sort of groove going on there. So easy to do. And so this is the stylistic consideration. Are we leaning towards something blues? Are we leaning towards something Chinese or Asian at least? Are we leaning towards, depending on the sophistication, are we leaning towards something quite romantic? Limitations of a pentatonic scale. And the other thing is that especially applies to ensembles, which most of you would be involved in teaching, is the whole thing of creating how the accompaniment creates actually the colour. It's not so much the solo, it's actually the accompaniment that creates the carpet on which we're going to be walking on or playing our music. So if we have something quite gently rhythmic with that, sounds so limited then, because you've got this other part of the menu starting to come into it. So you've got this adds all the rich dimension. So in many ways, in ensembles, I think the accompaniment's more important than you get people across a pre-devised set of accompaniment motifs. So it might be things in 3, things in 4, things in 6, 8, things with a lot of rests in them. Almost alluding to a kind of tango, or it could be something that's very busy. Almost like a drone or a drone. And then we've got the whole question of dynamics and what difference that makes. And rather than this being something of a whole lot of things the kids are meant to learn, if we break it down enough, we can give them very simple experiences of dynamics where all they need to do, explore what happens if they do a very static one. And again, if it's percussive, then it's repetitious, using repetitions. Or if it really changes a lot. Then what we're playing certainly has a lot more magic and atmosphere to it than if we make a child ends up feeling very exposed if they're just playing a pentatonic line, and it's a little bit difficult for them to create perhaps something that even they feel is magical and worthwhile. But once you start having an accompaniment in there, then suddenly what they're doing takes on a huge amount more value because it's in a context. So the stylistic question is something that it's really up to us building our own musical library, a sort of inner musical library of different periods of music, different styles. That's why I think world music is such a great avenue for everybody, because I think firstly they're all across it, and secondly it really is not that difficult to take on board if you haven't already. I'm a great magpie. I learned all this. My big sister, when my parents went away, used to take me to, I used to go and stay with her up at Carlton near the Melbourne Uni, and you know, we did all these uni student sort of things, and one of them was going to get a falafel at a Lebanese takeaway. Went in there, there's music on. Go to a Chinese restaurant, there's music on. Go to an Afghan restaurant, there's music on. So all of these things, and I'm not a scholar in any world music idiom at all, but I can imitate and allude to many cultures' music, just because I've had a bit of a play around with it. And that's something, just done a whole series of recitals based on Japanese shakuhachi music and all their modes. So there's certainly the tonality, but there's, again, the wonder in all that is how they use silence. So can be a lot of drama in just a few notes, and I think that's another element. It's how people how we can overlook the value of silences in terms of creating drama. And again, drama's with the music. It's what everyone comes to the concert on Friday night at Music and Vegan to hear. They don't come to hear people play. They come because of the emotional drama that's going to touch their hearts and fill them up again. But again, you know, I just hear stuff. I hear violin music from the Sudan. I go, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
The timing's out the window for us. It's all sorts of great stuff. So there's lots of really informative things. That's just a pentatonic with a raised seventh instead of a flat seventh. And they play it out of tune, so it's, they sharpen those two, and then the sharp seventh section. Again, you know, if you've got capabilities with strings, that can be a lovely thing to explore to if they're at the level that you can do that. The three main things that are going to be your helping aids are the sphere of tonality and exploring even simple things with 2 or 3 notes to really get what that offers. So again, going back to this, the Lydian mode with the sharp fourth. Very different from. So just exploring yourself with the colours and then finding the distinctive the distinctive characters that really each scale taps into, I think is really helpful, and then bringing the essence of that in really simple games, really simple improvisation. I'm sure you've all done improv games and things with the kids, and this is no exception. And I think the value in that, again, we can always be playing with the dynamics, we can always be playing with the drama of it. So, 3 notes, you can actually create a story that, oh, what's happening, what's going to happen next. Tonality, the metrical side of it, is it in 2 or 3? Is it fast or slow? Is it consistent? Does it even have any rhythm? Is it a drone? Is it a drone thing? Is it very rhythmic? Is it sometimes rhythmic? How do we use the rhythmic component again to create drama? And that's where all the tension of the phrasing comes from. And then the stylistic considerations, what kind of composer or style of music is it leaning towards? So that gives us a pretty powerful palette, and that's all really subjugated to what we're trying to capture in the story, what sort of emotional drama we want to get across. I think one of the other things is helping create awareness that the drama and the phrasing and the meaning of the music comes through how we touch the instruments, because pretty much everything, even a brass woodwind, we do it with our mouth. Is it really strong? Is it very sensitive? Is it tender? Is it very exotic and romantic? Is it something that's just very plain? So where we're dealing with those sorts of questions, let's take a whole tone scale just for fun. If we take a whole tone scale and use it as a phrasing and dynamics game. Do it the other way around. How's that different? How does it create a different emotion? Even just using a few of the notes. Or where we go the other way, so using diminuendo crescendo games, which a lot of classical players and students are not that great at, because mostly we've come across dynamics as being something in our music, All these little crescendos and diminuendos and markings. But really, what it's all about, I think, is creating an awareness of the drama in the music, that all these things actually contribute on a visceral level for us as human beings. It's one thing to sit there and go, oh yeah, crescendo here, forte, diminuendo, piano, that actually doesn't convey anything. It only conveys something if we're really here. So then we really make it happen, because we're directing it to happen. We're not following script and going. It's a very different outcome. And so I think the more we educate students in I would call it like making everything physical. It's making music a physical thing in how we execute it, how we touch the instrument or blow it. Is all about the drama. That's what creates the drama and the feeling in the music, the sensitivity, the nuance, which classical music's so renowned for. Are any of you, this is what makes all great playing great. It's the drama that we create. It's the expression. It's the tone. Tone's another big thing that I think is really important, and getting people to exploring with students how we can just change the tone and the difference that makes. Or just very kind of a little bit more subdued. Or a little bit articulated. Once we keep combining those things with dynamics and with the sort of waiting and rushing game, I think we end up with some very, very powerful experiences for students to have with their music, and even at very, very elementary levels. So I would never teach violin the way I was taught violin anymore, because these things I think are much more important and much more what music's about. Again, this is all about conveying stories, or I like to think of it as messages, and I can explain this to the kids this way, is that if you get a text message, because all the kids have phones, whoever agrees with that or not, but get a message saying, hey, we're going to pick you up this afternoon early from school, we're going on a surprise holiday. So how does that make you feel? That's a message. Music's no different. How does that make you feel if someone goes, with the emphasis there, or if they go, they're very, very different stories, they're very different poetry. So music education is something that starts here and stays here. It's not just a thing we do. Again, I'm not assuming any of them do anything like that, but in such a disconnected way. But I think the more we can take people on this journey with music, the more it'll mean to them. Whether they go on with it or not, it'll be something that they can get a lot from, just playing for their own pleasure. And they don't have to be at uni to hesitate when they get to the end of a phrase. Just wait for that last note. Everyone gets that. If you watch an animal, just play games where you're imitating an animal. It's running after something. And children understand this sort of language, of course, and being able to then do that, express that on an instrument, I think is really huge. So